You've really got a government pledging to incentivize the investment in these type of projects. And I think it's a real turning point.
It's inevitable, I think, that we're going to see more companies emerge in this space and more appetite. So it's a great thing. I mean, we are uniquely placed, I think, in Australia.
The energy transition is not going to happen without mining. So the question is, we need to be able to actually use the ESG that Australia has around mining and mining activities and actually wear that as a badge of honour.
Now we have a battery metals panel, so looking at supply, demand, and everything else. And so I'd like to welcome Adam Best, Principal Research Scientist at CSIRO, Joel Crane, Investor Relations and Commercial Manager at Cobalt Blue Holdings Limited, and Henry Jennings, Market Strategist and Analyst at Marcus Today. So thank you for joining us today.
Pleasure.
And just as a note, for our audience, we'll take questions throughout. So if at any point you have a question for the panelists, just, feel free to raise your hand. We have a microphone and we can address it as we go. So to kick things off, the big story right now on the battery metals is about the perceived shortage in supply of the key metals that are going to be driving the energy transition. And so as supply deficits across the battery metals space continue to grow, where do you see the biggest gaps in supply coming from? Henry, would you like to kick us off?
Thank you. Well, obviously, at the moment, the hot one is lithium, I guess. And it does seem as if there is a gap between supply coming on every lithium wannabe hopeful explorer or soon-to-be producer. Talks 2024, 25 in terms of production. So for the next couple of years, there's definitely a gap there. We're seeing high lithium prices continue across the board, really. So that is really driving investment in the sphere at the moment. So I can't see that really changing. I know that we had a report a couple of months ago. One of the big US investment banks was saying that the lithium price would actually come down in the short term, but we've certainly seen no signs of that. And when we look at the Pilbara Minerals BMX auctions, the pricing they're getting there is still extraordinarily high. So I can't see that really changing at the moment. And lithium has been really the big focus, I think, for the market at the moment, especially when things get a little hard, which they are at the moment in terms of all the macro headwinds. It's just been easier to go with the hot metal, if you like, rather than looking at cobalt or nickel or copper, etc., or even manganese.
I definitely agree with that. I think there's a big challenge now around how we're going to actually supply all the lithium that's required and how we're actually going to be able to get the utilization of the mining assets that we have. As was discussed earlier in the last panel, that there's significant issues with how the utilization of some of the minerals that we have. So lithium, particularly from brines, you can only really recover 50% of it. There's a lot of material that's being wasted or being re-injected back into brines. While the spodumene is quicker and easier to process, and that's where Australia has its leading opportunity, we don't have the infinite supplies of that. So while the going's good, we're going to have to do well, but by the same token, we're also going to need to open up new opportunities. And this is where end-of-life recycling of batteries is going to become a really important pinch point, probably from about 2030 onwards, in order that we can actually have all this material that we're going to need to actually continue the expansion of battery technologies. And I think, secondly, beyond that is I think there needs to be we need to broaden our view around energy storage and not just think of, when we think of battery, think of lithium. We're going to have to go and think more about redox flow, particularly at large-scale energy storage, where it can probably play a very strong role, and try and see if we can't segment out the market such that we can at least spread these precious resources as far as we can.
Yes, again, agree with all things said just then. But we also have a bit of a problem with the way that the near-term market signals are telling us. Indeed, in lithium, the price is telling us there's a shortage both now and in the future. But we do seem to have a problem with other metals, primarily cobalt, nickel, copper, the ones that are also highly required. it's been a negative price environment, a lot having to do with the macro environment, putting that pressure on them. But unfortunately, it's sending difficult signals to the market, and it'll make the more near to medium term producers, it just makes their life more difficult in trying to bring these projects to market. So unfortunately, I think while maybe the market signal for everything X lithium is telling you that the market is relatively supplied, that's a bit short-sighted, because a few years from now, and this is what we're hearing from our customer base, is that in sort of the 24, 25, and especially 26 period, that's when supply is really going to start running short. And unless the market gets the right signal to develop those assets now, we're in for even greater problems in the second half of this decade.
It's interesting. I've been watching a program on Apple TV. I don't know whether you've watched it, called For All Mankind, which is an alternate version of the space race. Sorry, I'm digressing a little bit here. But it's an alternate version of the space race where the Russians get to the moon first and kick off not a race to the moon, but a race for a base. And the Americans get their first base on the moon, called Jamestown. And the commodity that they're mining and the commodity they're fighting over, this was filmed a few years ago, is lithium, which is kind of interesting when you're seeing Hollywood and these guys have this major focus. And this is a couple of years ago. As I say, they've started the season 1. But it just shows you that there's this interest. And at the moment, that's lithium. They don't mention too many other metals, I'm afraid, on the moon. but lithium is very much the focus of that. And they end up close to war over it. So somewhat prescient, I guess.
And I know it's hard to predict the future, but in terms of, changing battery chemistries, the role of, ESG concerns, how do you see demand shifting right now?
I suppose on the front of battery chemistry, so obviously there's a flavor for every day of the week depending on what you're trying to do. So portable electronics are obviously dominated by cobalt device, so everyone who's the phone here has a cobalt based battery, whereas when we get to the automotive sector, we're looking at particularly the Tesla Model S's and those more powerful batteries. We're looking at the NMC and the NCA chemistries, and then if we're thinking more of our smaller automotive, we're looking now towards LFP, and as we move more into grid storage, LFP is going to start to dominate, because that's a volume cost demand driver there. So that's the lowest cost of levelized storage that people are chasing there. And of course, LFP is 25% cheaper than NMC. So it just makes much smarter moves to go there. But the commonality across everything I've just told you there is the negative electrode is graphite. It makes up nearly 50% of the battery. So there's a huge demand driver for graphite at the moment, and there's a massive tightening going on in China, because they're now saying we're not going to keep making artificial graphite. It's extraordinarily polluting, heavily energy intensive, and so there's now this shift towards natural graphite. And my own research group, we're doing significant amount of work for junior miners to help them process natural graphite, depending on the ore body where they recover it from, helping them characterize that ore body, helping them to then process that for battery grade materials. And natural graphite's an interesting product because it actually has much better ESG than you would get from, say, artificial graphite. So there's a massive push there, and natural graphite, it will need to expand rapidly in order to be able to supply of those wide range of technologies. And then beyond that, you still have all the redox flow chemistry. So there's a number of different flavors of that around, depending on what you're looking for. So zinc bromine is a good one, vanadium redox flow as well, but vanadium is also reaching a crunch point as well. It's been potentially always used in steel, and that's now moving away from steel, but there still needs to be many more projects brought online in order to support that growth of that technology, if we're going to use that even. So, and then of course you've got sodium, and sodium, everyone talks about it being far more common and cheaper and easy to get at, but all the materials that go around it are not much different to what's in a lithium-ion battery. So all you're doing is just shifting a problem here. So, and you're still using the same manufacturing technologies, and it's an emerging technology, so it's not yet deployable. But in saying that, some of the big battery OEMs are already really saying, okay, we're going to go and look at this more and see what we can do in terms of cheaper storage costs, maybe in more niche markets that it might be suitable for. So there's going to be the overlay of ESG across all of this. We are having the OEMs coming to us now They are very savvy to where their materials come from and how they're processed. And in fact, they're now asking for them to be processed well differently in order that they can actually improve the sustainability of these materials. And they're also thinking about what this all looks like at end of life as well, because they know they need to circularize this. Government's going to force it on them. So they're already starting to think now, how do we deal with these issues? So the chemistries we have today will be around for a good 10 to 15 years. So the challenges we have now have to be solved. If we don't solve them, it's not going to be solved by new chemistries. And the reason is if I start a new chemistry today, on 5 to 10 years before it'd be certified to go into the marketplace, because none of you are going to buy a battery that's worse than what you've currently got in your pocket, or less safe, or more expensive, or anything else. So the problems we have today, we have to solve.
Yeah, battery chemistry choice is something that we pay a lot of attention to, given the markets that we're in, because I'm sure everyone in this room is aware that there's this trend of moving away from the nickel cobalt based batteries towards LFP, as Adam discussed, and given it's a choice by both consumers and the producers of these battery makers and OEMs as well, it really comes down to it's very difficult to predict, as you said at the beginning. So, but I also completely agree with Adam, and he obviously knows best, that new chemistries won't arrive into the marketplace for at least a decade. So we do have to deal with that issue now. I think one of the main issues, again, like I said, consumer choice. It's going to be LFP is much more in vehicles, is much more relevant to high density populations in terms of EVs. There's no people aren't driving to their country house in most places in China. They're just driving to the shops and back and plugging their car in at their apartment. Whereas in America and Europe, that's a much different proposition. People need that, and it will suffer from range anxiety still. So you're going to see those markets continue to have dominance in the nickel cobalt bearing chemistries. But something too, I think the market is missing is eventually, and as you I think are touching on, Adam, is in terms of full life cycle. NCM battery recycling is a market that's in its infancy, but is going to be very, very significant. Lithium, nickel, cobalt recycle rates are very low, or the input of secondary material into the markets are very low, whereas in the more advanced commodities like copper, it's 30%, aluminium is 20%, lead, it's 60%, cobalt is less than 10%. So it's going to increase, and that's because of the popularity of this. But I question, maybe just a quick question for you, if you don't mind, Adam, what does the life cycle look like for LFP? Do people want to recycle $100 a ton iron?
That's a very good point. Actually, it's people don't want to recycle LFP at all. There's just literally no net value in it, and because of the current structure of the way that recycling is, well, particularly in this country, you basically all your money disappears in the value just by transporting it from a collection site. So there has to be something you can do with LFP to upcycle it, and actually at CSIRO we're developing technologies around that to increase the value of the product in its next life. So, because that's a way that you can actually create more value for and incentivize actually recycling. But there's the graphite in the cell. So LFP in itself, not worth it. Graphite, absolutely. As I said, there's going to be a massive pinpoint there. So we definitely need to do that. And also to cobalt as well. The biggest problem we have is all the small batteries we have. There are millions and hundreds of millions of them, but they're so small. There's heaps of cobalt in them, but the actual economics of actually recycling it is really painful. So this is really becoming almost a policy regulation problem around how do we incentivize people when you buy your new phone, you're handing back, or your iPad, you're handing back the old one, and they're going to be recycled so that we can get those commodities back, because the battery actually still has an inherent value. It might not necessarily give you the charge and discharge you want, but it still actually has a metals value internally in it. So we have to find a way to deal with some of these policy and regulation issues.
Adam, can I ask you something? I get a lot of questions from our subscribers on the newsletter talking about alternatives to lithium ion, and obviously the dominance of that in electric vehicles. And I always simplistically talk about VHS versus Betamax, and that ultimately the VHS won. But is there a DVD?
For dodgy reasons, remember.
For dodgy reasons. Is there a DVD out there that kills both of them?
Not at the moment, no. So all the new emerging technologies that you would probably read about, so things like lithium sulfur and lithium air, they're probably the big killer technologies. But you've got so many problems with that technology. So number one is lithium metal. So there's not even enough lithium to turn it into carbonate, let alone to make LFP or NMC or lithium salt. Where are you going to turn all of that into lithium metal? Everyone also talks about lithium sulfur being a cheap battery. Well, sure, sulfur's pennies in the pound, but lithium metal, anyone checked the price of that lately? I think it goes for about 150,000 US dollars a ton. And its ESG is appalling. So there are some if we're really talking about this drive to better ESG and to more sustainable technologies, then lithium sulfur is still a lovely lab-quaint technology. And yes, there are companies that are out there working on this, but they can work on the technology at the cell level, but there's a whole lot of stuff that needs to go on around them to improve that. And then lithium air is probably the holy grail, and many companies have spent lots of money trying to make that work. I like to describe it as everything that's the hardest thing about a fuel cell and the hardest thing about a battery, cut them in half and slap them together and make your problems 5 times worse. So you're not going to get there. So where you're going to see solutions, I think, is you're going to see more segmentation. You're going to see more niche applications, like where sodium will be, I would think, more into your commercial scale energy storage, where you've got a room where you can put sodium. It's going to have a bigger footprint, lower energy density, but its levelized cost of storage will be lower. People will buy that. They'll say, that's great, I'll have that. Lithium, if you have a slightly harder duty cycle, or you might have some footprint constraints, so on and so forth. I think you're just going to see more segmentation rather than this lithium does everything story. Thanks.
Well, we're definitely going to be getting more into lithium in the next presentation, just following this. I wanted to talk a little bit about the amount of, so, we've talked a bit about how there is going to be a supply crunch, but exploration and getting new projects up and running is kind of the key to answering this looming problem. So is there money going into the industry? Where is it coming from? And what types of projects do you see it going to? Maybe Joel, as our corporate, you want to...
Well, I think anyone at this conference just wandering around downstairs and seeing the sheer number of companies out there exploring, not a shortage of, and there probably never will be in that sense, because there's always plenty of people and entrepreneurs and geos who found an asset they want to try and develop. Obviously, the hard point is how to fund that and how to get it out of the ground. It's an increasingly difficult environment, particularly over the past 12 months with what the macro is doing to both commodity and share prices. So it's not a great time to be raising money for a lot of companies who feel like they're already undervalued. So you have that to start with. But it's also a very interesting time in terms of what's happening with government support. I've been really trying to think of another industry completely different from this industry where that a level of new government support has led to perhaps a boom and helping them out. Maybe biotech over the past couple of decades, where just a little bit of nudge from the government can really help those entrepreneurs to come up. But the more important point I'm trying to get at is legislation, such as what's happened over the past several years just in Europe, but more recently, of course, in the US with the unfortunately titled IRA, where you've really got a government pledging to incentivize the investment in these type of projects. And I think it's a real turning point. It has been happening in other countries, in Australia as well. I mean, we can feel it because we've been a recipient of government support for a couple of years now in a number of ways, both monetary and by getting things like major project status, what really helps us fast track our projects. There's a lot of government support, and I think that's a real game changer, particularly in this industry. You touched on graphite in China, which is, China dominates 95% of graphite, and they're saying, oh, we don't want to produce as much because of the environmental reasons, which is certainly the case, but also because countries around the world are saying we don't want to buy Chinese graphite anymore, and they're reading the writing on the wall. So that's why you've seen increasing amount of graphite companies both here today in this hotel and across the world trying to get up and running. And you'll see, and just by government saying that's a level of support, but of course the real it comes down to actually providing that money, and you can already see The bilateral relationship between, just for example, there are many of these bilateral relationships, but with the U.S. and Australia, just this year, you've had the U.S. Provide very low cost funding to two very large Australian companies, one being a graphite company, one being a rare earth, for operations in the U.S. That's only going to continue, that type of investment, both domestically for the U.S. and abroad. I know the Commerce Secretary is in WA this week. The U.S. Commerce Secretary is in WA this week, likely having those type of conversations with companies out there. So that's just one example. Australia's been great. Korea's been great. Europe's been great. We're recipients of all of this, and we're in talks with all of these people because they're very interested in seeing not only our project but projects like ours go forward. So it's a new and quite exciting time.
I guess from a market perspective, there doesn't seem to be any shortage of funding, really, for emerging materials companies. It's a question of price, I guess. And as Joel and I were talking about before we came on, question of picking your partners as well, rather than just going for the MOU, the non-binding MOU, as you talked about. But certainly from a market perspective, that there is still an awful lot of money, and it's one of the few stories on the ASX and in the market at the moment that is attracting money because it is a great story, and investors are hungry for great stories. And despite the turmoil that we saw in September in the market and that we've seen this financial year, lithium stocks, look at Pilbara, it's going all-time highs. Even coal companies, dull, boring, ESG, horrid coal companies, Whitehaven, all-time highs. So there is certainly plenty of appetite out there from investors for these new projects and existing ones as well. So funding is not an issue, but who you partner with, I think, is the far more important thing, and where you get that funding from and how many strings that are attached to it as well. Obviously, equity investors don't have quite so many strings, but they're always impatient. We all, as an equity investor, we all want it to happen tomorrow, and we all know that in reality it takes a long time.
I suppose a question for you, Henry. Obviously, the government's decided that it's going to go forward with an Australian-made battery plan and a national battery strategy, which is now in the works. Do you see this further improving the investment opportunities and also helping push some of these early-stage miners and discoveries forward?
Oh, I think it's without question, Adam, definitely. I mean, we saw it even with the tail end of the coalition when they were throwing money around at various rare earths projects, Arafura with Nolans and those sorts of things, and funding those, as we saw the Morrison government try to shore up some of their credentials. It's inevitable, I think, that we're going to see more companies emerge in this space and more appetite. So it's a great thing. I mean, we are uniquely placed, I think, in Australia.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing that as well, Adam. To answer your question from our perspective, because we're in discussions with both WA government and industry to try and set up a battery materials hub there, because obviously Australia is very well endowed with all the key ingredients that go into a battery, yet we don't make anything. We don't even make the beginning products, from the sulfate to the precam to we're barely even making sulfate. So that's something that we're proposing to do, and a number of other emerging companies would like to do in WA, attract a battery maker over here, and we can start making those products. So those discussions are certainly happening.
Before we continue on, do we have any questions from the audience? Yep. Could we get a microphone over here?
Thank you. Adam, I just wondered, could you comment on the types of graphite that are required in the marketplace and how they've changed over the last few years, and what types we will need going forward in terms of flake size and so on?
So if you're thinking about your raw mineral body, we're very agnostic about what that actually looks like. So there is obviously different sources of graphite. So vein graphite, particularly from Sri Lanka, is lovely because it's just graphite. You don't have to separate it. All you're doing is crushing it and getting that down to the right micron size before you would spheronize it. It's probably the best going around. What we see from Africa, Australia, and other places is obviously within a mineral ore body. So you have to obviously crush that material down in order to liberate the graphite in order to do that advanced manufacturing that you need. Where you can find ore bodies that have already a very fine flake size, you're actually taking a step out of that manufacturing process. So if you have large scale flake, let's say 100 microns or greater, you're going to have to mill that down to 30 microns before you stick that through the spheronizer. That costs energy. And so where you can take those steps out, that's very advantageous. Then from there, you're pretty much on the same track as everyone else. You have to spheronize, so make these little potato shapes. Then you have to classify. So you then, when you put them through the, here's the bad news. It's like recovering lithium. When you do the spheronization, you don't just make the one particle size. You end up with a broad particle size of anything from fines, what we call below 4 microns, all the way up to big clumpy stuff. But you want to separate out the stuff that's about 15 microns because that's what the battery guys love for their high energy batteries. And so sometimes that means you're already screening out 50% of your product. So there's a big piece of work on that we're involved in around trying to improve that processing to improve those yields. Then you've got to do your final stage purification, remove the last 5% of impurities, coating, and then you're into your electrodes. So in terms of your question, finer graphite is better because you're taking out some steps. If you can understand your impurity profile really strongly early in the piece, then that actually helps guide you to your last stage purification where you can get away from using things like HF and use other types of products. You won't be able to do HF purification in this country is my general view. You're going to need to find other ways of purifying. Interesting, Syrah's doing their HF purification in Louisiana, so it's an interesting way forward.
Yes. Large flake graphite was all the buzz in the last cycle.
No, it's all, yeah. So now everyone's thinking about how do I actually take steps out of this? How do I reduce energy demand in my processing? So, and also trying to get better yields. So the other thing is you normally, as I said earlier, when you spheronize, you get a bell curve of particle sizes. You used to throw away everything but the 15. Now people are keeping the fines. So anyone who's got a fast charging battery in their pocket, that's generally using the fines because you've got shorter diffusion pathways, lower resistance, so you can charge those batteries up much quicker.
We have another question over here.
Thanks, Amy. David Franklin from Argonaut. So my question is around graphite and really the investability of it. If you look at where the resources are, they're Mozambique, Madagascar, Tanzania, and then you've got the processing dominated by China. Mm-hmm. And I guess you've got the value in the large flake where the demand is for the small flake. So it seems a complicated investment metric for an investor saying, yeah, I really want to own graphite. Just interested in your thoughts on that.
I can talk to the science. I'll let these gentlemen talk to the investability aspects. The USGS is a lovely book. It's got a large amount of information around different sources of graphite. And Australia is actually has quite a lot of graphite. Unfortunately, it's just not all mapped out neatly. We've got quite a number of small miners who we're working with to help them process their graphite. And it turns out graphite's in northern Queensland. It's in on the Eyre Peninsula. There's quite significant amounts of it. You can go down and basically scoop it off the ground down there. And then in the southwest corner of Western Australia, there's also decent supplies of graphite. And they're all quite good resources, about 15 to 20% TGC. So you're getting quite good yields there. But your point about the processability is you would want to process, if you can, on site. As soon as you start moving stuff around, most of the battery OEMs are saying, no, we're not interested in that because the carbon footprint becomes ridiculous because you've got to ship this stuff everywhere. And in fact, some of the graphite companies will even tell you, well, actually, that's going to add cost and that's going to make my final price of my product too expensive anyway, so the OEMs won't take it on. So where you can do as much of this processing on site, and it's not complex processing, just so we're clear, you can buy a spheronizer from LPM in China for $20,000. It ain't the best, but you can buy one. You can do a lot of this on site. So there's definitely ways and means to get this done. But the push is to try and do as much of this at the source as possible to reduce your footprint. So the last thing you're shipping out of your site will be a finished product.
I think you've put your finger on the problem with investing in graphite companies. It is not easy, and as Barry said, we had a cycle of large flake with Syrah, and it was all very disappointing in the end, and it's struggled ever since. So it is hard. I guess that's why, to some extent, lithium is such a far easier story at the moment to sell investors, because it's a lot more transparent, and we're actually one of the biggest producers in the world. With the largest reserves of lithium. So it just makes it an easier story, especially from a country risk perspective as well.
I'll just have a quick comment. Not that I'm an expert in graphite by any means, but more what I was touching on before, just the processing itself and what you were discussing. And that's where, again, to harp on what I was saying, the role of government is certainly helping the Syrah story. Coming to a more happy ending now, the U.S. government's funding Louisiana. I think we'll just have to see more of that, particularly in Southeast Africa, where a lot of these Australian-based ownerships are. So we hope that we can just see that type of investment and help along the way.
We'll take another question.
Adam, can you please explain what's involved in the process of ferronizing?
Oh, the spheronizing. Yeah, sure. So that's just a mechanical process. So there's 3 or 4 different ways you can do this. So one of them is what we call a hammer mill, which is basically a rotating thing with basically a hammer inside it. And what it's doing is folding the graphite flakes, and you're building them up until you get these nice little potato shapes. So when you see a micrograph of them where they've been cleaved in half, you can see the folded layers of the graphite sheets inside those particles. There's another machine that we use at Syro. It's a very nice machine. Comes from Japan, called a Nara, a hybridizer, and that machine has a rotating arm on the inside of a milling thing, and that just rolls the flakes around, and it balls it up. It's like taking your hand and rubbing a piece of Play-Doh on a bench. It's essentially what that's doing until you get it into this ball-like shape, and you can adjust the power and time that you do that for. So you can spheronize huge amounts of graphite because takes only about 3 minutes per cycle, so you can put tons of material through these things quite easily. And then there's other machines like the LPMs, which are just another form of jet milling for spheronizing, and they have what we call spheronization trains. So the material just keeps going through different classification stages, and you just got bags at the bottom, and you just take the bags that work out, that meet the right sizes that you have. So it's not a complex problem. The bigger complexity is it's the properties of the natural graphite as compared to the artificial graphite, and that comes back to the gentleman's question earlier, and how it performs inside a cell. That's the trickiness. So that's where people are now making, like BTR China makes blends of artificial and natural graphite in order to deal with some of the variances that you see in the natural graphite performance.
So I thought we could kind of change topics a little bit now.
The ratio of natural graphite to artificial graphite in batteries is changing a bit. Can you talk about that? There used to be more.
I'm probably not allowed to talk about that because I've signed enough NDAs that it get me in enough trouble. Let's just say that's like secret sauce stuff. It's like your Coca-Cola formulas for a lot of these graphite suppliers. They do their own mixes, and then they work out how they can then, because what they're trying to do there is trying to get improved tap density, so the amount of mass per unit volume into a cup, because that's the volumetric energy you'll get in the cell. It goes to the diffusion characteristics, the conductivity, the capacity of the electrode, and on top of that, people are also adding silicon as well, so it gets even more complex. So. Yeah, unfortunately, I can't really tell you more explicitly on that one.
Okay.
All right. So, as I was, we're getting a lot of reports almost weekly about OEMs and other types of end users that are getting involved in the upstream. What role do you see for them within this entire environment or economy? And how do you see that evolving as we move forward?
I don't mind kicking off then, because we're in discussions with a lot of these guys. It's interesting. conundrum, I suppose. It's a problem for the entire industry. Maybe problem's not the right word, but I would characterize OEMs and battery makers as well as non-traditional investors in this part of the cycle. They have no idea what they're doing. And I suppose as a mining company, we don't really know how to approach them. But they've been given mandates, probably in the first case by just the consumer itself, but then by boards saying you must go and source your material from ESG-friendly places. We can know, to their horror, some of these companies would have realized that most of their cobalt comes from DRC and mined by perhaps children and these sort of things. And the story goes on there's a different horror story in every commodity, and this is new for them. But they've been given mandates to go and fix this problem. OEMs have the money, but don't understand the problem. Battery makers understand the problem perhaps a little bit better, but don't have the money. So to your specific question, what are the role that the OEMs have? It's a huge one. Look, we've seen that just this morning. GM announced a 10% stake in a nickel hopeful here in Australia. So there's money going around. They want to help. They want to be part of it, but it's going to take time. 10% is a great start, but it's certainly not going to fully fund the construction of this plant in Townsville. But it's going to play an increasingly important part, and that's why to this day, companies like BMW and their procurement teams now have commodity analysts advising them on how to go forward.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. With our experience with OEMs, they obviously have their problem they're trying to solve. They go to the battery cell manufacturers, and the battery cell manufacturer says, "Oh, that's nice, but why don't you use that? Because we can make that by the gazillion and with that capacity." And the OEM will say, no, I need this to do this. And then there's a bit of a argument about it. But in the end, the cell manufacturer will win out because that's what's at volume for them. And to customize is extraordinarily difficult. So that's where the cell manufacturer sits. And the point about them being poor is so true. They call it the smile economy. The materials manufacturers make a lot of money. The cell manufacturers make nothing, and the end user normally makes a fairly large cut at the end. So the cell manufacturers generally will make the material suppliers pay for their development costs as well. If you want an offtake agreement, they'll make you pay for it. I think that would be your experience, I would suspect. And that's what we see when we work with smaller companies where they're trying to get their stuff in front of these OEMs, that they basically have to pay for a large amount of the development cost to get that forward. So they have quite large amount of power in this structure. So how do we change the game is going to be difficult. And I think the example of the OEMs now going into and getting onto the share registries is not an uncommon one. So I think you see this with POSCO, Toyota, quite a large number of Chinese companies have gone onto share registers such that they can access offtake agreements and influence processing and ensure that ESGs all line up for them. I think the comment earlier was around not having their boards embarrassed. I think is a very important one.
I think that's obviously very important. We've seen a lot of OEMs taking positions in Australian mining companies, and getting that security of supply. I think the last 3 years during COVID has shown us how important that is, and Tesla has marched ahead because they've had that security of supply to some extent. You see the numbers there, shipping out of China, even outside of China, and shipping into China of their electric vehicles. The German guys have got to play a lot of catch up here, and given their past credentials with the Dieselgate issue, I think there's an acceleration there that we're going to see as this unfolds. That the German car companies are going to get more and more involved in securing supply, getting on boards, being able to influence, and being able to be ESG very, very conscious. They don't want another Dieselgate. Can't afford it.
Do we see a trend of them getting into earlier stage projects even?
I think, Joel will probably have more insights than that, but certainly I wouldn't be surprised to them get into more early stage projects. They've got the cash. It's just a matter of whether they have the resources to analyse and pick potential winners, which maybe they're lacking in, as we saw the previous speaker talking about lack of people in the industry, it may be that is going to be a constraint that they have, and as a result, they'll have to go to the bigger, more established players, at least initially, to get that experience and try and work out what they want, what they need, and how they get it.
Yeah, definitely agree that you're starting to see some early tie-ups with the majors. You know, BHP and Rio both announced tie-ups with OEMs. I think in the next couple of years, they're going to have to rely on the relationships with the battery makers because they have, like you said, have a better understanding. So, you know, a lot of the negotiations we have are with tie-ups between OEM and their partners. So it'll be through the supply chain, but hopefully funded by those with the actual cash. I think it's just inevitable, simply because of as we discussed in this panel, and I'm sure on others, just the pure shortage of material, in large part due to the lack of funding. It's going to have to be required, and the price signals will start telling us that soon.
All right. And so, I mean, it wouldn't be a mining event or a mining panel if we didn't touch on ESG. You know, mining has a bit of a public relations issue, misconceptions about the industry, and the understanding of the role of metals within the energy transition overall. So how do you see ESG playing a role in the financing and growing of the batteries space?
It's going to have a massive influence, and not only just in from a corporate standpoint and an investor standpoint, but a lot of the money that's out there is ESG focused, and has very high requirements. So I guess the benefit of groups like ours and a number of our peers is that we're starting from greenfield. So we're in the midst of building a mine, so we can use the best practice. Obviously, operating in a very strict jurisdiction like Australia, where those thresholds to be met are extraordinarily high. So the our end plant and processes will be the greenest you can possibly be in the world, and so that's something we can already purport, and that's something that we will know. So there is that advantage, and so I think it's a good time to be a miner, particularly to be an emerging miner, because of the availability of the new technologies and the able to green yourself in that sense. And you know, for the first time, there's a real demand for it, at least in certain segments, and we can talk about some places on Earth, like a major nickel producing countries, you know, able to get to that place very quickly without having the sort of ESG credentials, because the main market, China, it has less of that scrutiny. That'll change with time, but we're seeing that level of scrutiny from our customer base, which will be primarily Europe and North American markets, where we have no choice but to operate like that. So it's as green as it can be.
Yeah, I have to say that's, listening to the previous speaker before the coffee break. I mean, that's imperative. You know, you can't change that. That's the way the world's going. The customer demands it. The companies demand it. The governments demand it. The regulators demand it. It is what it is. That is where we're going. And resource companies are doing a pretty good job, I think, in transitioning and informing the public, I guess, as to the benefits of mining investment. We've all got smartphones. We wouldn't have them without mining. We wouldn't have really our lives.
I think there's still a bit more to do here, and this is something where we're looking at CSIRO, is to turn to this social license to operate is really important. I'm not sure how many of you encountered the people downstairs as you came in this morning. I don't know if they were aimed at you guys, but there's a real communication piece that has to be really doubled down on about the energy transition, and the energy transition is not going to happen without mining. So the question is, we need to be able to actually use the ESG that Australia has around mining and mining activities and actually wear that as a badge of honour. Companies are coming, international organisations are coming to Australia to take advantage of this, because they know that when they source our product, they have a clean, green, well-sourced, ethically driven product. But I think we need to communicate that more to the type of people downstairs, because if we don't, they're the kind of people that are going to slow this transition down, because the transition doesn't occur without mining. Energy storage is utterly critical to this. And energy storage particularly is reliant on the materials and metals that Australia has to make that happen. So I think we need to work on that social license to operate. I think we need to communicate this story better, and where there are deficiencies, try and work on them to enhance them. And I was at a meeting a little while back over in Perth where there was the Energy and Mines meeting, not promoting anyone else's product, but it was a really interesting conversation around how can you take a mine and make it net zero? What are the technologies that you're going to need inside those mines in order to be as net zero as possible? It's a really, really tricky job what you guys do. So what are the technologies that I'm developing that your minerals are using that are going to, mining that are going to go back into that circularization to actually drive that net zero outcome? I think that's another part of that story.
We're going to have a few companies after the lunch break who are actually going to talk directly on that about what they're doing to decarbonize their own operations. Do we have any questions from the audience before we continue? We're kind of reaching the end of the hour for the panel. All right, well, I had another question. So at our Singapore event last week, one of the panelists on the batteries session talked about consolidation and M&A as the next phase that we see for battery materials companies. What is your take on this?
I think that's inevitable. I think that's something that we're going to see. I'm still surprised, actually, that BHP has not really pushed into the lithium market. We've even seen Wesfarmers in the lithium space some years ago. So I think it's inevitable that we will see M&A activity, especially if we did see, I guess, if prices of lithium came off a little bit and some of the smaller players struggled to get that funding from, I guess, the speculative end of things. So we could see some players emerge there. But I think it's inevitable in the sector we're going to see M&A activity. And we're already seeing it with BHP trying to go for Oz Minerals. Not so much in the bigger ones apart from that, but I think it's going to happen.
I wholeheartedly agree. I think the big guys have struggled over the past couple of years because valuations have been quite strong. Obviously, come off quite a bit, but historically speaking, a lot of these companies, particularly the ones that are developed and or about to produce, still remain in I guess financial markets terms overvalued. So they really struggle, particularly given how badly they got burned in a couple of cycles ago. I think you may see a lot of consolidation sort of in the bottom to mid-tier end, where there's a lot of synergies between companies, particularly in Australia. There'll be a lot of synergies between some of the smaller copper guys, some of the smaller nickel guys, and even some of the assets in Canada and America and Australia might have some synergies given the route that the battery supply chain is advancing, and what I discussed about just these bilateral relationships with the countries. So I think that's where you might see a lot more action, is that sort of mid-tier level. You've seen IGO completely change their strategy given their accelerated nickel portfolio, that they now want to produce nickel sulfate, which is basically directly taking on BHP, who recently transformed their nickel operations to sulfate. So and there'll be a number of synergies that IGO will have with other Australian companies. So that's where I think you'll see the major action.
All right. Any questions from the audience? Okay, so I like to close off each panel with just a few kind of, future predictors. What do you see? What are your thoughts on, the next couple of years for the battery metals?
I think it's going to be more of the same, to be honest. I think we're going to continue to see elevated prices, demand outstripping supply, shortage of people, shortage of materials, new science. Adam, obviously at the forefront of that, but new science coming through. But things take time. And I think investors have to be a little bit patient sometimes. But they're not always good at that. But I think it's going to be more of the same.
Yeah, I'd agree completely. I think some of the technical problems that are facing some of the mineral technologies, I think, need to be really strongly addressed. So how we get investment into those, I think, is critical. And I think like direct extraction technologies are critical to that, to improve yields, because with, again, too much wastage. So where we can improve yields, we can actually take a lot of the pressure away to actually have to bring on new mining opportunities. So I think where we can develop those technologies, but then the other problem is how do we build up a skilled workforce, and that's going to be critical for us as a nation to be able to take this on. I think it was amazing how quickly everyone cleared out when COVID occurred, that we have these all of a sudden these supply shortages of students. Like we're seeing this through the university sector now, that grad students are just not like hen's teeth. People are throwing ridiculous amounts of money at people to do a PhD at the moment. So these are the type of things that we're going to really have to address if we're going to be able to really take advantage of some of the technology opportunities that are coming with this technology.
One thing the market has consistently got wrong over the past decade, really, or since the emergence of popularity of battery metals, is demand. Every year, battery demand is consistently upgraded, and because of underestimation. And I think soon enough it's going to become a demand shock. Perhaps we've already seen that because of what's happening in the lithium market, but it hasn't translated to some of the other markets, again, because of what I touched on at the beginning of this macro environment. But I think that this level of demand shock, if the major providers of market information, looking at you, Harry, are able to just really pump these levels up of what demand is going to look like, I think the market will sort of wake up and say, and really look down that supply outlook and into the second half of this decade and see that there's simply nowhere near enough material to supply this strong level of demand that's eventually going to become consensus. So I think that's where the next move of the cycle is going to be, as a demand shock.
All right. And so, as Joel mentioned, we're going to hear a bit more from Harry shortly. But let's give a round of applause for our panelists today.